the recording so that I can send you the recording of this session afterwards.
Recording in progress.
So thank you very much for coming to this Idea Puzzle webinar about philosophy of science and research designing at the doctoral level. So I want to thank this invitation to the Doctoral School of Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, Professor Beatriz Ferros and Maria Lopes Sepúlveda. And thank you, all of you, for coming. So our agenda is to present this framework. It's a theoretical framework I've been publishing about over the years. If you visit the website ideapuzzle.com, one of the pages is publications, and you can download everything that I've been writing with colleagues about this framework over the years. What I would like to tell you is that this framework can be seen as 21 decisions, which also means 21 exercises. So you can do it with yourself, with your colleagues in research seminars, or with your supervisors, or if you are teaching a methodology, research methods, or research seminars, you can also see it as 21 exercises. And I will send you, as I said, after today's presentation, I will send you the recording of the session as well as the PDF that I am about to show you. So basically, the theoretical framework is based on philosophy of science because I believe that philosophy of science gives us extra criteria to make decisions, extra criteria to improve the coherence of a particular research proposal, article, or thesis. And maybe my favorite example is one of the Idea Puzzle Prize winners. We give €1,000 every year to the most coherent research design created with this Idea Puzzle software. You can check the page Idea Puzzle Prize for doctoral students in any of the universities with this software, and WAB as Autónoma has won several times this prize. And one of my favorite examples of how philosophy of science can help you be more coherent with this particular research proposal, article, or thesis is because one of the winners in 2015, she had won the first national doctoral grant in psychology by the Portuguese Science Foundation, and the external jury had evaluated her proposal 99.7%, and then together with the supervisor submitting to this prize and to this tool, these 21 decisions, they self-evaluated less 30%. So I like this number because it's a good example of the room for improvement. Those 30% in the self-evaluation were the difference between looking at your research design with or without philosophy of science. And all of this is based on my first-hand experience because I'm Portuguese from Porto, but I lived 9 years in Finland. I went there as Erasmus, but one of the things I did was a PhD 20 years ago. And it didn't work. The first year was a surprise to me, a bad surprise, because in spite of all my effort to follow the recipe for success we were giving in the late 90s, which was a Gantt chart. You're probably familiar with the Gantt chart, where you look at your research project as a sequence of tasks like literature review, methodological choice, data collection, data analysis, thesis writing. That sequential thinking, it's good, it's great, but it's not enough. It was not enough for me because I dedicated the first year to literature review. Actually, my professor suggested that if I implement that Gantt chart of literature review in the first year, uncertainty would go down in the second year because you would focus theoretically. But then in the second year, I had maybe an unusual surprise, which was lacking access to data. Okay, so methodologically, I had decided a certain sample. In my case of strategic management was strategic alliances between companies, Portuguese and Finnish companies, and internationalization. And then when contacting the national agencies for international trade and for direct investment in Portugal and Finland, they couldn't give me a single example of an alliance between a Portuguese and a Finnish firm. So sometimes, no matter how well you plan, how well you execute, you can have surprises. So this model is inspired by that experience. I want you to think your research project with the Gantt chart, which is sequential, but with this tool, Idea Puzzle, you will be more systemic thinker. You will be more integrative thinker. You will not separate over time literature review from methodological choice, from data collection, data analysis, and thesis writing. You can start thinking with your supervisor, with this tool, all these ingredients from day one. So that's my first message to you. Don't underestimate the problems of access to reality. And I will show you references about it. So let me now give you one word about the website, how it works. So we have a theoretical model, and I have transformed those publications about the theoretical model into something more interactive, more digital, more gamified. So basically this is and again, I will tell you today, I'm a fan of design principles, and I also teach design thinking apart from research design. It's a different topic for many years. And I'm going to tell you today, if this would be the title of the news, is less is more. Okay, everything. I'm a strong believer in subtractive thinker. I'm a strong believer that if you can choose between two theories in science, you choose the one with less assumptions, more parsimonious, more simple. If you can choose between two designs, you choose the simplest design. Okay, so I'm gonna. I created a software which is also very simple. Okay, don't expect a fancy, sophisticated software. This is a word processor, and even the menu is the same as you are used to. You create a new document, you open the ones you want to edit, have created previously. You don't need to save. Actually, it's automatically saving every 20 seconds what you write in the text box. But it's a word processor. You can change the title, preview before printing. Printing as PDF, as when you submit to the Idea Puzzle Prize, or downloading Word, which I particularly like for you to share with the supervisors and peers to get comments and track changes. So the Word file is very useful for sharing. And then if you search the database, we have over 8,000 research designs all over the world. But the most important function of the software to me is the help, okay? It's even bold, because when you click help, I'm actually helping you answer the question. That's why it's an exercise. 21 questions, 21 exercises. And when you click help, you can see instructions to answer. You can see tips. Some of them I will comment today. You will see definitions, introductions to understand the conceptual framing of the tool, and then the original bibliography that inspired me, taking into account that I come from strategic management, okay? And finally, you have those examples of research designs, which I find very inspirational in many different doctoral programs, because this tool tries to be for the whole university, including the one I just mentioned today, this psychology in 2015. That won the national competition in Portugal. And at the end, you have my personal contact. So I want you to ask me anything you want to ask. So feel comfortable to ask anything about your project, about the software, about the model. I'm here to help you make those decisions. So what I suggest now is a tour. Okay, it's like a touristic bus tour, where we go through those 21 questions. I cannot be as extensive as the help function, which is the ebook I'm editing, but I can give you an introduction to what you can expect from this tool. Okay, so let's get started, and thank you once again for joining us. And at the end, I'll leave room for you to make questions with the mic or in the chat as you wish. So I already have some of my notes there because I've done this webinar over 400 times. So allow me to have already some notes there. What do we mean by, and just one more note, I'm going to follow a sequence, but one of the reasons I like a puzzle metaphor is that puzzles don't have a sequence, a right sequence. So feel free to assemble your puzzle in any direction. The second reason I like puzzles is that the easiest decisions are the last. So don't leave these decisions pending. It's the worst you can do. It's like a circular mathematical problem. Don't let these 21 decisions depend on everything among themselves. So what do I mean by keywords? And on the left side of the triangle, I'm going to ask 5 questions to improve the coherence of your literature review. So you're doing a great job already. You're already focused. But I'm going to challenge you, and remember, as a philosopher of science, I'm going to invite you to think as a philosopher of science. And actually, I often like to ask how many of you have taken a course on philosophy of science. Okay, so that's actually something I like to start with. So if you can please answer, please let me know. Today we are a team at the moment of 80 people. Let's see in our team today how many of us have attended a course on philosophy of science. Because I didn't tell you that when I failed with the Gantt chart in the first year, I took an elective course on philosophy of science, and it brought me back to the game in the second year with another topic, but with confident and systemic overview of my project. Okay, so we have 21% at the moment who have 20%, and that's absolutely in line with my experience. In 400 webinars and seminars and workshops, I don't expect more than 20% doctoral students who have attended a course on philosophy of science, but I hope, that's my mission worldwide, that you register for one at your university, okay? Because PhD is Doctor of Philosophy, and I'm aware that today is much harder to have time or even have a course of philosophy of science in our doctoral program because we have many other priorities. You have to publish, you have to learn qualitative and quantitative methods. We have a lot of pressures, but remember, the original version of the PhD was for you to think and argue a thesis with philosophical depth. So 20%, that's the and I'm happy that 20% already did it. So those are the results. Okay, so let's think as philosophers of science. And I'm going to give you the example of my PhD 20 years ago. So my second topic, the one that saved my PhD, it was now not strategic alliances anymore, firm internationalization. It was about personal contacts of managers, which I have here, personal contacts, and multinational coordination. And this could be the first exercise to improve the coherence and focus your research design. And if you are doing a multiple paper thesis, please think one paper per time, okay? The idea puzzle only works if you work at one paper at a time. One idea, one paper, one idea, okay? And here's the first tip. I would like that you think about 2 concepts as I did. They can have more than 1 word per each concept. Think about it as the title of your paper, proposal, dissertation. The first half, actually, because usually what we have is the theoretical title, 2 concepts in one direction, and then you have you have colon, and you have the case of Finnish multinationals in Portugal. That's the empirical side. That's the sample after the colon in your title. So the second half of the title, it's something we'll discuss later. It's your sample of data. But the first half is theory, is what frames and focuses a literature review. Okay? So if this would be a workshop, which is not, I would ask you to write in the chat and present to everyone the first and the second concept, theoretical keyword, the first half of your title. Okay? Now, please pay attention to the direction. Often, let me tell you the typical flaws, because I already have experience of almost 17, 18 years doing this. Typical flaws. You have one concept, but the second one is not actually a concept, okay? Finland is not a concept. Barcelona is not a concept, okay? So make sure the second one is a concept as well. On the left side of your brain, not some practical example on the right side of your brain. Another flaw is that you have two concepts, but if you don't actually define them, you don't realize they are tautological. So please pay attention to this very philosophical tip. Non-tautological definitions means I cannot define A and B, 1 and 2, as similar, overlapping. It's very difficult to study the impact of water on humidity, because they are overlapping, okay? Water and humidity. And especially in social sciences, we create so many concepts about reality that often we are talking about communication and collaboration, and I'm not able to separate them entirely, okay? So these are just a couple of tips, but as I said, if you click help, you have more. You have more details in the help, and you can contact me through email. Okay, the software also has a self-evaluation functionality, which I like, because those are traffic lights, okay? 3 traffic lights. And it's not a judgment on the contents of your answer. I leave that to your supervisors, okay? I'm only asking, have you made this decision? Have you made this decision or not? This is still pending, because the worst thing in a puzzle is that all pieces are not assembled, okay? So if you have not assembled, decided, you can choose 0% undecided, it's red color, 50% is yellow color, and 100% is green color. And when we make presentations in workshops with this tool, you just present the colors. Actually, if you have 3-minute thesis type of competition, you present 3 minutes your colors and you go straight to the ones that are red. You just want feedback on the ones you feel are not decided. Okay? So I'm going to self-evaluate this one as decided just for you to see the first color. Okay? And there you go. In 21 decisions, first color, this one is decided. I'm safe with the title. Even though in my case, as I told you, 20 years ago, I had to change my title after 1 year. But okay, I trust this is safe. Second exercise of the tool, second challenge for you to focus and structure, improve the coherence of literature review. Streams of thought. Here, I think philosophy of science is also useful because, just one thing I have to tell you, because it's one more tip. If you want to have 3 concepts in your title, beware that instead of one direction, from 1 to 2, or 2 to 1, instead of 2 directions, you go with 3 concepts, you go from 2 direction to 6 direction. And just an example why I like simple design. Okay? And I know that some of you will want to have 3 concepts in the title. You need 2 concepts, no more than 2. 1 is too little because it doesn't relate, it relates implicitly with everything. But 3 is too much. Okay, you can elaborate in the text afterwards. Okay, so that was one more tip, but you find it in the help. Now, the second challenge is for you to think beyond. As a philosopher of science, you're going to think beyond references. I know we love references and we want to have a nice list of references, and we can talk about many things related to that. For instance, I personally think that your references should have not just articles from journals. I think it's actually very interesting if you have at least 1 master thesis, 1 doctoral thesis, 1 work in progress paper in a conference, because those are refreshing papers. Not so rigorous, but more refreshing. You know what I mean? And the same diversity I would like to see in terms of chronology. You should have the classics, the seminal ones, the first ones, not just the recent ones, okay? But that's not the tip I want to give you. The tip I want to give you is Philosophers of science, and especially sociologists of science, they don't look at your reference as individual authors. They see it as communities, social communities of scholars around the world. So I challenge you to look at your literature review as a sociologist of science and realize that you belong to aware or not aware, you belong to a scientific community already. So my challenge here is, are you able to identify your research community and identify at least another research community that challenges yours or is challenged by yours? Because at the end of the day, a literature review is a thesis and then an antithesis, and finally your synthesis. That's a literature review. And to give you my example again, if I was a Portuguese in Finland studying multinationals, I should know that my professors, my supervisors in Nordic countries in Europe, Finland, Sweden, Norway, they are the Nordic school of multinationals. And they write actually book chapters claiming they are different from an already existing American school of multinationals. So it's not biased to say I belong to the Nordic school of multinationals, but I acknowledge there was another school of multinationals. But most importantly, I want to tell you deep that I understand the theoretical assumptions of each and why they are different. Even they study both multinationals. The Nordics have the organic assumption, which means managers cannot make the strategy and control the multinational top down. It's bottom up. The lower levels of the organization actually also make strategies, get information, help the multinational. And we're talking about hundreds of people, thousands of people around the world. And the design assumption is the opposite. We assume that Americans assume that, on the contrary, the design assumption assumes that top managers, a couple of people, can control a multinational. So the challenge is clear. Are you able to go deep and answer in this second question in the text box two streams of thought with two different names, one of each you belong to, your supervisors belong to? And all I want to know is the different assumptions. Take the example of COVID. We had several vaccines being developed in the pandemic. They work different. We have different mechanisms for vaccines. Actually, later on, one of them got Nobel Prize. Okay? So go deep. And don't worry so much that the number of references, because it's not quantity, it's quality. But the quality, the depth of your debate. And for me, it's enough too. I've seen literature review articles with a table with 10 different schools. You don't need so much. Start with two. Again, less is more. But one should be yours. Okay? And don't reinvent the wheel. There are journals that only publish literature reviews. And guess what? They are the most cited ones. Everyone is reading the history of their field. Senior scholars writing in my field, I'm talking about impact factor of almost 15. Articles in the Academy of Management annals with 40, 60 pages. A team of researchers showing us how we got here in the last 40 years. Okay? Don't reinvent the wheel. And even journals, dialogues, when you see one number and they are criticizing each other, that's the best sign of sociology of science. They have one article, another criticizing, and the first authors counter-arguing. That's the best evidence I can see of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, okay, of dialogue between communities around the world. So that's the second challenge. What's your academic community, and what's the name by which it's known? Okay, it's a bit more challenging. I'm going to show you another color of the traffic light. I'm going to choose partially decided. You know something, but you'll know more. It's work in progress. And you can see now the traffic light is yellow. Okay. Okay, third of 5 challenges to improve the coherence of your literature review. Let's talk about research gap. Everyone talks about research gap. Actually, everything in Idea Puzzle is something we are familiar and we have heard about it. It's just that I'm giving it a new synthesis and a new meaning. When we talk about research gap, because I'm very focused with this tool, I should tell you that ideally you start using this tool 6 months after literature review, okay? Because in the beginning you read many things. I've seen people with 18 keywords and concepts after 8 months reading. Then they use Idea Puzzle to focus. From 18, I want 2, remember? So after diverging, you have to converge. So I let you diverge for 6 months. Then we have to focus. So now I'm asking you something very focused. Research gap is a quote, not just a citation, something you can actually put in commas. A quote from an expert, ideally from the streams of thought, suggesting that your research topic in the future would be great. Okay, so someone in the conclusions of a paper, of a publication, is saying that in the future we need to know more. And it's exactly what you're doing. So it's going to give you a lot of comfort and psychological comfort. It's a legitimation, you know. It's not just you saying, oh, it's convenient, I like it, and no. In my case, I have here an example, which is a quote I found, someone saying that in the future we need to know more how managers network in multinationals. And I felt like that's exactly what I was doing in my second topic. So you can wait to find these diamonds. It's kind of serendipity, you know, or you can be more systematic. You can just read conclusions and see what they are suggesting for the future. Okay. This quote can be very useful even when you write your first paper and your papers and you need a good introduction, you know, why is important what you're researching. That's the third challenge, okay? I found it difficult. I'm going to choose the third color of the traffic light, undecided. And I can see the red color there. So these are the 3 colors we'll have at the end. Now, the fourth question to me is very special. You know why? Because usually, I speak for my supervisor and many supervisors, they think they should start from here. And in my model of Idea Puzzle, it's the fourth, not the first challenge. I don't know how many of you, in the first meeting with your supervisor, the first question your supervisor made was, what's your research question? Mine did. And I don't even know what a PhD is. You're asking me my research question? I don't even know what topic I'm going to research. So give me time. I know you are familiar with everything. You are a scholar already, but more and more PhD students are actually, candidates are actually from outside academia. They are not familiar with the conferences and debates. So let's see it as the fourth challenge. Because if I change the topic, as I did in the second year, I change the experts, their suggestions for the future, research gap. And within a research gap, you can make many questions. So don't accept so much pressure. Okay, you don't have to know your research question yet. And I'm going to give you tips to make it very focused and coherent. First, if you click help, because the help changes 21 times, right? The help is different for each of the 21 decisions. You can see that there, until the Nobel Prize I already mentioned today, you have 5 levels of knowledge depth. Okay. It's almost like, well, coming back to COVID. In the beginning, science didn't know what COVID was. We need to identify what is this thing. Then he tried to describe how it works. Then explain why it works that way, which is more difficult usually in health sciences. And then predict when it behaves, when it happens. And finally control what gets measured gets done. So control with quantitative methods. How much? So what I'm asking you is, let's be very coherent. Keep the same 2 keywords of your title in the same direction. Don't change the keywords. Don't change the direction. All you have to do is add one of these 5 types of questions because they represent global levels of knowledge, depth. And the experts usually are working in one of them. If they are still trying to explore with qualitative methods, it's too early to do hypothesis testing with quantitative methods, But if they're already measuring, it's too late to do qualitative research. So try to be in sync with them. You are one of them. In my case, we knew a lot about multinational coordination, the hard type of coordination, which is organizational charts and structure. But we knew very little about the soft types of coordination, like manager socialization. So I was safe that the experts, when they were asking my type of research for the future, as I told you today, they were still at level 1 and 2 and 3. So I felt safe. Level 2, how personal contacts influence multinational coordination. It's coherent with the title, same keywords, same direction, and now I add one type of question. Because sometimes the problem is that we don't even see these type of questions. People make statements with a question mark. Okay? And as with everything I say, less is more. I don't need 2 questions. I'm happy with 1. Okay? Those are the tips. And to be coherent, I'm going to choose the same as the gap, not yet decided. Final challenge for the literature review. Again, we could discuss what is state of the art, state of the science. I'm very focused on this proposal, article, or thesis. So to me, all I want to know is the current answer to your research question. If you are doing hypothesis testing, the current results to the same, to your hypothesis, okay? Because sometimes, or maybe more often than not, we tend to say something which sounds really bad nowadays. It used to sound bad, but now it's even worse because we're publishing 3 million articles per year globally, not to mention AI, and you are telling me there's nothing about it? How do you know? Better not say that. Better say the only one reference that says something about it. The one reference that comes closer to answer your research question. Now we are talking. You know why? Because if I try to publish a book, they don't accept there's nothing about it as an answer. They will never publish my book. But if I tell them, I know 3 books that come close to this, but this is different. I'm different. It's different. So show you're different. Your research is different because you know at least one reference that comes close. Look at my example. American author saying, personal contacts of foreign subsidiary managers, same managers I want to research. Help the multinational deal with local governments and customers. Okay, we have a partial answer. I know my peers around the world, but I know there is still a lot to uncover and discover with my research. Okay? And I should warn you that in some journals, in my field, they don't ask 1, they ask 50 references to join a conversation. I'm asking you 1, but I know that top journals with less than 5% acceptance rate might ask you 50. Okay? It's just the beginning. But never say there's nothing about it. Doesn't sound good. And you cannot prove it. Okay, so that was the first 5 challenges of 21. I must say the first 10 are very abstract. The last 11 are very pragmatic. Okay, so don't worry, it's not going to be this abstract all the time. And I'm being deductive. I don't know if you've noticed. I had a chance to present my model to the same professor who taught me the Gantt chart in Finland. And he told me my model idea puzzle was very logical. And I guess it's because we were deductive. Have you noticed? If you change 1, you change 2. If you change 2, you change 3. Change 3, change 4. So that's deduction, okay? That makes it very logical. And now I'm going to be deductive from the left to the right, because I'm going to show you that it's not about qualitative or quantitative methods. It starts before that. And that's why you need philosophy of science to understand that methods, qualitative or quantitative, it's just tools. The philosophical question is, what's the criteria to choose a tool? What's the criteria? I mean, you go to the toolbox and you take a hammer and then everything looks like a nail and you want to play with it, or you have already an idea of what you want to do before you choose the tool. You want to cut paper, you take the scissors. You want to cut wood, you take the saw. Yes, I think you should know what you want to do. So I'm going to give you four things, four types of conclusions for your paper. You're going to publish a paper. And in my view, there are four types of conclusions only. I call them four meta-isms because I know that usually we have a forest of isms, positivism, post-positivism, modernism, postmodernism, hundreds of them, and that only makes PhD candidates confused. What I want you to do is to think that you can make four types of conclusions about reality, about the empirical phenomena you are interested in. And I can give you examples of departments at the campus at the university, and they are all using different stances, okay? So let me talk about my example again. I can study personal contacts of managers, which I did in my PhD, as facts, but I'm not going to measure the facts. I'm going to just describe them. And I call that qualitative because I don't measure. And I call it objectivism because those are facts. I can prove them, independent from your opinion. So those are facts. And this is typical of historians, history, management, my field. The historians talk about facts. They can even use numbers, but they talk about the year, the quantities of people involved, countries involved. They don't use numbers to measure. It's to describe. Okay? The second, which is the most common, is quantitative objectivism. So here you are not content to describe, you really have to measure. So the conclusions will be different. In the first case, I would say something like, it's a fact that personal contacts bring information, help decision making, and help coordinate the multinational. Here, no, here I would measure how much they help with descriptive or inferential statistics. More typical of departments of engineering, economics, health sciences, right? Second type of conclusion. Third type of conclusion. Now, I'm not interested in the facts. I'm interested in the meanings different groups of people, stakeholders, attribute to the facts, okay? So here would be what personal contacts mean for different people. I had some managers telling me it's negative. It brings corruption. Others telling it's positive. It brings creativity. So, especially in anthropology, in education sciences, in law, I would expect you to be much more interested in meanings, subjectivism, and not without quantifying anything. Just describe the meanings. And that's already emancipating, revealing, publishable. The final example, because this is a matrix 2 by 2, is that you're going to, you know the meanings, but you haven't measured, so someone has to measure it. And the best example I know of this quantitative subjectivism is psychology. Have you noticed what psychologists do? Interestingly, psychology is in the same department as education. But if I go to coffee, I go for a coffee in the cafeteria, in the same faculty of education and psychology. I talk to someone in education. I know I have to speak qualitative subjectivism, Vygotsky. But if I'm talking to psychologists like my wife, it's all about inferential statistics, creating scales, validating scales, measuring statistically. But we are not talking about facts. We're talking about personality types. We're talking about beliefs. We're talking about meaning. Does this make sense? So I'm showing you the diversity. Like, take my example. I'm in a business school. If I'm talking to my colleagues and they are from economics, I have to talk measurement. They don't conceive not measuring stuff in reality. All they do is measuring. But with econometrics and so on. But if I'm talking to my colleagues in management, we are very happy to help a manager with a 2 by 2 matrix, and everything is qualitative. Idea puzzle is qualitative. It's a map. We make maps, we're happy to model reality with maps. No numbers, no need for numbers. Okay, so I'm showing you the plurality of university because you know what? I don't think mythological textbooks are doing that. If you read most mythological textbooks, they only see two and three. It's dichotomic. They say, "Hey, you're doing quantitative? Oh, that's facts. You're doing qualitative? Oh, that's meaning, subjective." It's not true. I'm giving you two more stances. Okay, so be daring, dare to do something that is not acknowledged in qualitative, in mythological textbooks. Okay, and in my opinion, if I look at science globally as a philosopher of science, I think what is great is if you do multiple papers. You know, your first paper is going to describe the facts, and you are not worried about measuring anything. And it's one case, few cases, theoretical sampling. The second paper, you're going to measure something with descriptive or inferential statistics. And after you know the facts, let's go to the meanings. If there are human beings involved, they will be attributing meaning to the facts. And you describe that and eventually measure that. Okay. So this is not difficult. I'm going to put partially decided. But in terms of help, my suggestion is a handbook, reference number 7, Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research, usually has a very nice chapter showing the history of these stances. Okay, and in general, we could say 19th century was very quantitative, Enlightenment. 20th century, we had the language turn, which is more subjective. And I would say nowadays, I actually think we are in the 21st century, we are in the action turn. Nowadays, we want impact. And universities are pressured to have impact. Okay, it's almost like universities have to be polytechnics too. They have to invent, they have to help solve problems. So I see a lot of action research, you know. You have to solve problems as well, not just describe. Let's see that now in the next decision, methodological decision. You chose one type of conclusions for this particular paper. And what I'm going to show you now is that if you made that choice, you focused more than you did in the title. In the title, you focused in two concepts. Now, and then in the question, you focus in one of 5 knowledge depths. Now you focus on one of 4 stances, philosophical conclusions. And now I'm going to show you that if you have chosen, you are already quite focused in terms of method. First of all, let me tell you that the word method is very ambiguous because sometimes we're talking about the study, which is a research strategy. Study it has conclusions, theoretical conclusions that answer the question. So when you use method for a study, the best is to call it research strategy. Then people know what you're saying. Then you don't confuse it with other methods that only collect data, like interviews or questionnaires. And those are not studies because they don't answer anything. They just give you data. The same with statistics, analysis techniques. They are not studies. They don't answer anything. They just give you data. They process data. Okay? So the word method is very ambiguous. So I prefer research strategy. That's the technical one. But if I told you that I wanted in my PhD to describe facts, look at my toolbox. It's much more, it's small actually. Historians will use historical method or a biography of a person. Contemporary research will have case study and look at a study, not a case. As I said, if you want impact, solve problems in reality, industrial, because might not be just a PhD. You might have an industrial doctorate to work with the industry. You might have professional doctorate like medicine or education in practice, practical. You might have a professional. You might have a practice type of doctorate, which is more recent in the arts, schools of fine arts, where you make sculpture, painting, or even architecture, music, you know, and then you need to create documents, publish about the work of art you created. So Actually, this type of artistic research, I find it more usually subjective, so I'm going to put it here. But so, I want to describe facts. This is my toolbox. Okay? But if you want to measure that second paper you're going to make, you want to measure with statistics, okay, it's a different toolbox. Now, you can do a lab experiment, full control of variables, or quasi-experiment, in reality with secondary data, large databases, okay? You can make a large-scale survey, computer simulation. See, the toolbox is different. Okay, so first you choose what type of conclusions you want to make, and then you choose the study. If you want to describe meanings, look, another toolbox. Now the anthropologist is going to use ethnography, or in law, we're going to use hermeneutics to interpret texts. If we are critical about the press, critical studies will use content analysis or compare individual narratives. And as I said, in artistic research, fine arts, we usually create something, and then can be a music composition, and then we use artistic research to describe the process and publish about it, or the meaning of what we created. Okay. And finally, if we are in psychology, remember psychology, measuring meanings, you can use large-scale surveys and also psychometric studies, different toolbox. Okay. So my suggestion is, don't start with method. Don't ask yourself if you prefer qualitative or quantitative method. That's the wrong question for a philosopher. The question is, what do you want to publish about? The facts or the meanings humans attribute to the facts? And you want to describe or measure them. Okay, and ideally you can do 4 papers. If you want, you can make 4 papers about your topic, and the sequence would be these 4 I told you. Then let's talk about other methods which makes them ambiguous. Data collection. You see, the output is just data. It doesn't answer a question, so it's not a study. But you will need sometimes questionnaire. If it's a lab, instrumentation. You can be not in the lab, but in the ocean, oceanographic research in the boat, field instrumentation, going to bottom of the sea. You can be in the lab, you can be in vitro, but in reality, it can be in vivo, biological study. But in general, try to write something here. How are you going to collect data? And if someone asks you what's your research method, don't say interviews, because that's not a study. What you have to say is interviews in the context of a study, which can be case study, action research, grounded theory, and so on. Focus groups, observation, field notes, if you are an anthropologist. So I'm giving you here many examples, but you are free to add more. And then analyzing data, again, gives you numbers or words. It doesn't answer the question. It's not a study. So what I'm asking you here is, especially if you're doing qualitative, beware that there is no research, qualitative research, without coding. If you are not transparent about the type of coding, how you will reduce the vast amount of data with coding, it's not going to be transparent for you to publish. Okay. And then in terms of quantitative analysis, that's always statistical. In both cases, the research software makes it more transparent. And it can take 1 month to learn the research software. So please write down here your decisions on this aspect. And finally, the most difficult topic of the day, of the 21, is to acknowledge that each of the 4 stances has different quality criteria. And this is important because often we are not fair to each other as peer reviewers if we don't share the same stance or are not familiar with the same stance. So for philosophers of science, paradigm incommensurability means that different stances might adopt different quality criteria and lead to unfair peer reviews. So here's the example. I'm going to give you a long list for one, and then you'll see the others by comparison. In my example, qualitative objectivism. Because I want to describe facts, I will never accept the criticism that I'm not measuring. Because the point is not to measure, is to describe. And we have created mixed methods because no research strategy in the world, no study is able to maximize description with detail and measurement. Okay? You always have to choose one or the other. So external validity is analytical generalization. We'll never say we are generalizing statistically. The same with internal validity, as I said. You cannot criticize me for not measuring. Construct validity means that the concepts are understood by other people than you when you make questionnaires, for instance. So it has to do with semantics. Convergent validity is triangulation. Okay, two satellites triangulate the location of a ship in high sea. That's better than one. I claim that the most important message of this tool, idea puzzle, is parsimony. Less is more. Okay? And it's one law of philosophy of science, probably the most important one. If you click help, you can see a philosopher of science, reference number 7. He won a prize at the end of his career, and one of the books he has written is about Occam's razor, parsimony, less is more. Okay? So whenever you feel compelled to triangulate, and actually doctoral candidates triangulate usually much more than they can process, because it's human. If you're anxious in the beginning of the project, you're going to read more, collect more articles than you can read, more data than you can analyze. And you want mixed methods by default. You're always triangulating. But that's emotional. You don't need to do that so much. So I'm going to, with idea puzzle, I'm always asking you to simplify, parsimony. Okay? And then discriminant validity, I like when you create categories, make sure they are not tautological, they are not the same, overlapping. And finally, reliability. You need to be transparent, as I said earlier, with coding in qualitative research. Be transparent so that others can replicate. But now look, if you are measuring, you have different types of validity and reliability. Okay? It's statistical. And if you are not interested in facts, or this paper is about meanings, you actually reject validity, reliability, and triangulation. You talk about trustworthiness, authenticity, and crystallization, which means meaning cannot be triangulated as a fact. It's like light reflecting in a crystal in every direction. And the one, psychology, is pretty much like number 2, so statistical. Okay, so I'm trying to convince you that we have different types of science, at least 4 different types of science in the campus. And make sure that when you are submitting for a paper, for a journal, that actually those reviewing understand your quality criteria. Again, I suggest the Handbook of Qualitative Research in SAGE as with a chapter on this topic. Okay, as I told you, the first 10 decisions are very abstract, and now the last 11 are very pragmatic. And actually, to me, that reflects that methodological textbooks only talk about method, and nowadays have one chapter on literature review, but they don't talk about this side of the triangle that I like so much. For philosophers of science, now we are going to talk about ontology, the nature of reality. And when we say that the PhD is original contribution to knowledge, scientific knowledge, we mean that we, on the left side of the triangle, with literature review, epistemology, nature of knowledge, we try to acquire knowledge about reality, ontology, nature of reality. And how we do that? With methodology, nature of research. So the triangle symbolizes science. And our goal now, top down, again being deductive, is that I will hope you will not have the problem I had of not having a sample. Remember, I spent one year with literature review, and then I had no access to reality. You decide a sample in the methodology, can be theoretical sample if it's qualitative research, or statistical sampling if it's quantitative, probabilistic or non-probabilistic. And yet, when you go to reality, it's not available. So how can we minimize that risk? The first decision is the unit of analysis, okay? Unit of analysis. And let's try not to confuse it with the level of analysis. Different things. And I've seen senior scholars discussing one and the other, for instance, in a conference I attended in Uppsala, Sweden. So to me, a unit of analysis is an entity or process, static or dynamic, cross-sectional or longitudinal, an entity or process in reality. And you are interested in that empirical phenomena. And that example, let's call it example, should be grander than the two concepts in your title, because you need both of them to vary to demonstrate they are related. And actually, I remember a professor in Finland, Jean-François Henard, saying that we had data, most student doctoral candidates have data, but it doesn't make vary the two concepts in your title. Editors call it operationalization of the concepts, or they say that your data is not in alignment with the two concepts in your title. It's actually, visually it's interesting that in Idea Puzzle, the two concepts and the unit of analysis are side by side. They should be aligned, okay? And it's very important because it's going to increase your internal validity, because if you describe what you want to describe, we just saw it's a quality criteria. It improves the internal validity. If you measure what you want to measure, you improve the internal validity, okay? The question is, what should I compare? I think here we have a choice paradox, too many choices. It's almost like go back to your favorite papers and just look at what they are comparing in reality. Look at the streams of thought, the experts, what are they comparing in reality? You can imitate them, so it's okay. Or you can invent another way of comparing, no? Because if I tell you that our brains on the left side understand creativity as a concept, but if I ask your right brain to compare it in reality, we all come up with a different research design. Some of us will compare creativity, others will compare arts, others compare problem solving, you know? So it's the operationalization that gives us too many options. But it's not difficult, okay? Benchmark what the others compare, check what the others are doing. It's not difficult, but someone has to decide. The second way to minimize the risk of not having a sample is to look at the level of analysis. And this is my favorite decision of the 21. I don't know why it's my favorite. I guess it's because it's so obvious and yet so forgotten, so neglected by the whole campus, the whole university. Because the only department I see that seems to pay attention to the level of analysis with respect for the readers is geographers when they make a map and they put the scale. And I thank them for that. But when I look at my own field, you know, and we talk about creativity or networks or communication, no matter the concept, we make conferences and I struggle to know at what level are we talking? At what scale? You know, and then it's fascinating topic because our species, human, 8 billion human beings on this planet, we actually, I think it was 22, the International Association for Units of Measurement had to create smaller and larger scales because we have too much data and we are multiplying data, we need more scales. Or we have more technology, nanotechnology, and we have smaller scales than nanos. Now we have CATCOs, which are much smaller than nano. Okay, so many scales. Tell me your scale. But more important than that, philosophers of science and even common sense believes that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. What does this mean? If the whole is more than the sum of the parts, it means that when you raise a level, not to mention a system, you cannot treat parts of the system as the system. They are emergent properties. When you go from 2 nanos to 100 nanos, there are new properties, new dynamics. It's different reality. It requires different theories. It's like in physics, comparing Newton's small scale theories and Einstein large scale. We know which one works better. So please, unless you believe in fractal theory, which claims that a fraction behaves as the whole, I don't believe that. Common sense doesn't believe that when they say the whole is more than the sum. Then specify one level and stick to it. Less is more again. Look at my title. Managers, individual level. Multinationals, organizational level. I stick to the individual level. My conclusions were directed to the manager. I know editors are asking multi-level. Maybe the world needs science, which is post-science, is multi-level and together with other stakeholders than just scientists. But this is a PhD. This is not your masterpiece. And those multi-scale studies often, they involve many different scientists in many different parts of the world. It's not for a PhD candidate, again, to be pressured to do multi-scale. So my suggestion, one scale only, tell me the scale, and make sure it's the same scale in literature review and in your data, because that's challenging enough. And then you'll see the theories are different, okay? Like Einstein and Newton. Not to mention Max Planck with quantic physics. Different reality, different theories. Not difficult, but I really like this decision. It's really my favorite. Okay, and almost ending. We all know that data can have two types of nature. It can be qualitative or quantitative. Quantitative is numbers, but we tend to neglect that qualitative data is not just words. Archaeologists and historians praise artifacts and anthropologists. But today we have multimedia. In Denmark, I've seen a doctoral thesis just with YouTube videos. The main qualitative data was not words. Social media, we have so many different types of data. Just make sure you acknowledge all of them here. And also another myth, in my opinion, is that quantitative studies don't have qualitative data. It's not true. You go to health sciences, you're using quantitative statistics, algorithms, or AI, and then you have images of X-ray. You have qualitative data. Always in quantitative studies. And in qualitative studies, you always have quantitative data. As I said, the historian uses numbers, but it's not to measure, it's to describe the context. Okay, so please identify both. And the same with the origin. We all know data can be secondary by default. It was for another study. It's secondhand. It was for another question. But I can use that data. It tends to be fast, inexpensive. The problem is that it was not for my question, so it doesn't have so much internal validity, but it's a good beginning. And then primary data, first-hand. I deduct a questionnaire from my literature review and research question. It's going to answer straightforward my research question, and that's a lot of internal validity. Great. The problem is time and resource consuming. So again, acknowledge the mix. Don't tell me one, tell me two. You will have the two types of data. I hope so. Here, I don't know if you noticed that in these questions 13 and 14, I actually ask you to triangulate. And it's rare. Usually I ask you not to triangulate so much. Finally, what's a sample? If you make these 4 decisions, the sample is going to be, again, a corollary, a set of one or more examples of the unit of analysis. If my unit of analysis, I didn't tell you, but it was contact network. Managers talking about 4 contact networks they had, 2 in the multinational, formal and informal, 2 in the local country, private and professional. Then I have to tell you how many I have. Specify who, what, where, how many. Be realistic now. It's not the library anymore. It's the reality that can create problems, usually is the weakest point. The system is the strongest, weakest point. In my case, I lost 1 year of my life because of this. And if I show you references in the unit of analysis, look at this reference. Number 3, breaking the silence about exiting field work. Okay? It's happening, not just in pandemic. We have problems of access to reality all the time. So minimize that risk with specifying. In my case, I had 11 contact networks, and I could tell you exactly who were the foreign subsidiary managers. If you do this in year 1, not year 2, you will have less risk than I had. Okay? So to conclude, we have covered literature review as epistemology, nature of knowledge, methodology as nature of research, ontology, nature of reality as a sample. And my last part of the presentation will be the inner part of the triangle, which represents relevance rather than rigor, because these 3 we have covered, they give rigor. Actually, funding agencies giving doctoral grants, they call it scientific merits. Okay? It's very rational, very coherent. But it's not enough, because philosophers will claim that if you have rigor, you don't ensure relevance. The biggest criticism to universities and business schools, in my case, says we are very rigorous, but society doesn't care about our research. It doesn't help practitioners. Let's try to be more relevant. And now I want you to think on your conclusions, future conclusions of this paper. Usually we have 4 sections in the conclusions of an academic publication. We have the answer to the research question, we have limitations, we have suggestions for future research, and we have practical implications. You know what's interesting? The last one, practical implications, is the first one here in Idea Puzzle, because I'm using Aristotle. The first scientific method book I know is Organon by Aristotle. And he used to say that great communicators, including science communication, starts with practical implications. It's not the last point, it's the first. If you can choose 2 topics, choose the one with more relevance, more impact, more practical implications for society. So here's the tip. Pathos means emotional arguments. Who cares? And I see positive emotions. You should be able to tell me what's the public interest of your topic. Of course, health sciences are the best in this, right? Like COVID. I mean, the journalists, the politicians, they give a lot of attention to health sciences. But no matter the field, try to make society interested in your topic. Second, commercial interest. We should all have commercial interest. I mean, we expect you to finish your PhD and start teaching. That's commercial interest. That's economic impact. You start teaching, you start giving consultation. Okay? Of course, the best, in my opinion, is engineering, right? Engineers create technologies, applications, products, companies, jobs. I mean, it's difficult to beat them. I'm giving you 2 excellent examples, but it's not for you to choose one or the other. Here I'm asking you to triangulate. Tell me 2 types of interest, public and commercial interest. And then negative emotions is, as you know, the ethical implications for human beings, in animals, environment, or conflicts of interest, politics, with other organizations in your project. Then Aristotle would say that the second way to communicate is with logic. And I want to show you that this model idea puzzle is always logic, and it's following 2 types of logic, like science globally. This tends to be the first section of our conclusions. We say, okay, in conclusion, we answer the question. In conclusion, we test the hypothesis. And I want you to know that the logic in this idea puzzle, if it's a new topic, recent topic, You have less theory, keywords, recent topic, less theory, no streams of thought to deduct hypothesis, no theory enough. So open questions, exploratory questions, qualitative research, small sample. So we cover the three sides of the triangle. So usually is to describe reality, not to measure, to develop theory. And then you have hypothetic deductive logic. The topic is mature, some decades old. You can check this with your supervisors. You have streams of thought, more theory to deduct. Hypothesis. Now you can test hypotheses with inferential statistics. Would that need a large sample? Okay. So the logic is always there in the triangle, no matter the type of research. And in this case, you don't want to describe, you want to measure, okay, to test theory. Okay, so these are the two main types of logic. I must say, it might be, if you are interested in more than just describing or measuring reality, if you want to create reality, if you want to invent something, you want to solve a problem with action research, design science, or artistic research that I mentioned today, right? If so, please consider a third type of logic, which is abductive logic. Okay, I'm gonna call it practical abductive logic because some philosophers like Charles Peirce, American pragmatist, used to talk about theoretical abduction. I'm not talking about theoretical abduction, which is basically is guessing. Okay, theoretical abduction is okay. The floor is wet. That's the data I have, and I have to guess from the theories that I already know which one explains the floor being wet. Can be because it was raining, I know that theory, or can be because someone dropped water, that's another theory. I'm not asking you theoretical abduction because I think it's present in every study by default. Every literature review is a choice between theories, but there are many other theories. So I'm only talking about other type of abduction. Practical abduction, which I see in practical higher education institutions like polytechnics, schools of arts, music conservatories, architects, to some extent lawyers as well. But I mean those that where the PhD was not traditional. Okay, it's only two decades old. And why do I think it's important? Because you have to separate what you create in practice. In engineering, we create a new technology. In design, we create a new design. Even in health sciences, you can create a new intervention, you know. But separate what you create from what you're going to say about it, what you're going to publish about it. So practical abductive logic is not to describe reality and not to measure reality, okay? You're going to create reality, okay? And as I say, it can be a new technology. It's always a new artifact, okay? And so on. So here, think about again those methods I told you: action, research, design, science, artistic research, and to some extent, I believe as well, interventions in health sciences. Okay. So you can read more about especially action research. Sage Publications has a journal called Action Research, and guess what? Since 2003, I really believe this century is the century of the action term. Okay, very pragmatic. And in this century, fine art schools, music conservatories started giving PhD, which they didn't before. Final section of the conclusions are two sections, right? And here Aristotle talked about ethos. I like to call it credibility. He meant credibility, which means that you can improve two sections of your conclusions if you look at limitations not just as empirical limitations. Okay, we often look at empirical limitations just as a lack of data. And to do so, you need to change your view of sample. Even in this model, sample is just to do with data. But someone said, and I agree, that every research design, every research project is also a sample of theory, because you're not going to have all theories in the literature review. And it's a sample of method, because you're not going to have all methods in your research. So if you acknowledge the three types of sample, not just data, you can extend your discussion of limitations into also theoretical and methodological limitations. And if you extend your limitations to three, you also have three suggestions for future research, not just more data. Okay, so I like that tip. To conclude, we covered the literature review as epistemology, the methodology, the method as methodology, and the data as ontology, and we covered the conclusions with Aristotle's three types of argumentation. I believe there is still room for three questions about you as the researcher, because funding agencies won't give you funding if they don't think you are the right person to lead this project. They call you the principal researcher. So I'm going to use another author now than Aristotle, which is French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. He used to talk about cultural capital, social capital, and economic capital. And I translated cultural capital, which is education and experience, into wisdom. And here my main point is, don't underestimate your first-hand experience of the empirical phenomena. And if you click help, you can see a very recent reference, number 5, 2021, to close or optimally position the value of personally relevant research. When we talk about relevance, personally relevant, I'm talking about experiences you have that it might be you are not able to put into words. It's what we call tacit knowledge. In my case, I can give you my example. I had been in Brazil 1 year, in São Paulo, in 97, creating a Finnish subsidiary. So I knew in my PhD, when reading the literature, what was to be a subsidiary manager. And you cannot put it into words, but it's tacit knowledge. And you can distinguish often what is true from what's not true. Because if the person who published in a top journal doesn't have first-hand experience of the phenomena, not even they are aware of what they are saying. Am I clear? You might be convinced already by now that's bias. But to me, bias is only when your last conclusions are the same as the initial assumptions. Nothing changed. You were there just to prove that you were right. And some people do that. They work 20 years in industry and they do a PhD to prove they are right. That's politics. That's bias. But in my case, it's not politics, nor it's actually advisable that you add to all the readings of explicit knowledge in the literature, in addition to literature review, you don't underestimate. And if you don't have this experience, go get it. I can't imagine Darwin downloading PDFs to his computer, honestly. To be like Darwin, you have to risk your life in a boat and go to Galapagos. You have to go to the field. So please, if you can visit companies, organizations, if you can try something, talk to people face to face, in reality, be a little bit more, I'm just asking, be a little bit more anthropological. Less screen time. Take a little bit from your screen time to visit reality, okay? So all the experiences you think relate to your topic. Then social capital is networking, but when we write our acknowledgements, it's usually less than networking, right? So I want you to specify a support network. It's less than networking, but it's more than your supervisor. We tend to rely too much on our supervisor. Supervisors struggle to keep up with so much literature, so much methodological. advancements and rarely have access to data in reality. Okay, so specify who will give you access to theory, method, and data, and that will be more realistic than just your supervisor. And finally, economic capital has to do with funding, but to me, the first resource, in Spain we say, tiempo es oro. The first resource is time. I invite you to visit phdcompletion.org and realize that 50 plus universities in the States this century, longitudinal project ongoing, finding out that only 30% of part-timers complete the PhD in 10 years. Worst, 50% of full-timers. I can't understand it. What's the explanation? How can you be unable in 10 years? Full-time is not enough to finish your PhD. And my only conclusion is probably because you are triangulating too much. The more you read, the more you want to read. The more data you collect, the less time you have to process. So I think Idea Puzzle has a word to say. It doesn't replace the Gantt chart. Keep your Gantt chart, your project management skills, but please simplify your research design. Do one paper at a time and don't triangulate so much. And today I ask you to triangulate less, minimize triangulation, maximize parsimony. That law of philosophy of science, Occam's razor. I didn't say before, but that philosopher of science, he didn't believe in Occam's razor in the beginning of his career. And now he has an award at the end of his career because he wrote the whole book, Sober 97. Here it is, Sober 2015, number 7, about this law, okay? And by the way, if you want to know if this to me is the most important law of philosophy of science, parsimony, I can tell you the second. Very rare, the one who invents doesn't get famous. Usually it's someone else who was able to communicate. So yes, I agree with doctoral schools that do 3-minute thesis competition. University of Queensland has created in Australia, it's all over the world. And I hope Idea Puzzle helps you think more simple, okay? This year's Idea Puzzle Prize, which is always in World Philosophy Day, third Thursday of November. I like the testimonial of the winner. She said, it was more philosophical, this exercise with Idea Puzzle, but it was more simple. So I hope it helps you simplify your research design for one research paper at a time, one research proposal or thesis. And I will send you the recording of this presentation as well as my notes here in the text box as an example. Thank you so much. So I'm happy to hear your questions about the model, the website, the software, the prize. Any question, ask me anything through chat or mic, please.
Hi, this is Olivia here. Ricardo, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Olivia.
Okay. Well, first, thank you so much for this presentation, and I really look forward to using the idea puzzle as I start breaking down my first paper. And my question follows in that line of thought. My PhD thesis will be composed probably of 2 to 3 papers that will flow together into the thesis. But my question is, can then I use the idea puzzle to have this overarching, the overarching research question or the overall purpose that is combining the 3 papers together? And what is your take on that?
Thank you, Olivia. Well, precise, excellent question. It's very important. Every tool has a purpose, and the purpose is not that one. Please, I really suggest the opposite. The idea puzzle, as the name says, one paper, one idea. If you have 2 ideas, they collapse each other, so each paper should be one idea, and each idea puzzle should be for one paper only. Although I acknowledge that, multiple paper theses are always challenging, and that's why we often write the introduction and the conclusion at the end of the process, in the beginning and during the process, during these years, idea puzzle is to be used for each paper at a time, and I can add some comments on that. To me, it's logical. If your topic is recent and you feel that it's unexplored, that first explore, describe the fact, then measure the facts. 2 papers. Third paper, describe meanings for different stakeholders, and fourth paper, if you want, measure the meanings. But with the caution that this, I see it usually in different departments, different disciplines of science, okay? But that's the potential there. Another comment I want to make for all of you, if you do a first paper, which is just a literature review, idea puzzle won't be the tool for you either. Because if idea puzzle is for empirical research, you need to put together integrative thinking and systemic thinking for theory, method, and data, right? So it's for an empirical paper, qualitative or quantitative. Literature review, it will only benefit from the first 5 decisions. That's not really the purpose of the tool. But for empirical papers, yes, qualitative or quantitative. And because I don't, as I say, my main message is parsimony rather triangulation. I hope you notice I didn't mention, intentionally, I didn't mention mixed methods, okay? Because I'm so extreme with this notion of parsimony that even that I prefer one good qualitative and one good quantitative than mixed methods. I'm not yet convinced about mixed methods as better than 2 great papers.
Oh, thank you. I meant to raise my hand, but it's a clapping emoji. On that topic, thank you for answering the question. But I'm starting to see that within the idea puzzle for my first paper, though, I have 2 methods that I'm using. I have used qualitative methods in which I have worked with stakeholders to get information, more qualitative information for as data, but then I also have quantitative data that I'm using to complement that qualitative data where there's still gaps for my stakeholders. So these are 2 methods that are introduced and have already been used in my first paper. So knowing that, but I can still go forward with the idea puzzle and just work it out as it is.
Yes, my suggestion is that you make more with less, which is one of the definitions of good management. You have the same resources you just mentioned, but you leverage more, because what I'm suggesting is 2 separate papers. You can do 2 publications instead of 1.
Okay.
But generally speaking, it's not just because it's good for you to have 2 publications instead of 1. It's because I find it easier to write and easier to read. I just told you the second most important law of philosophy of science. If the first is simplicity, and that justifies the 2 papers instead of 1, the second is communication. No one in the history of science, say philosophers of science, got famous for inventing. That means that we are poor science communicators. And for me, it's much easier to write and read just one great idea. And I think your qualitative data, for sure, without torturing the data, you will have your qualitative data stands by itself as a publication, and your quantitative data as another.
Thank you.
Thank you. But sometimes I agree with Olivia. Sometimes it's the methodological textbooks, it's our community, our school of thought that gives us the impression that, quantitative is better than qualitative, and therefore qualitative should only be an exploratory step. That's why I read in between the lines when Olivia talks. It's not just exploratory, because if you think as a philosopher of science, if you look not just your department, but the whole university, you see the wonders historians and other disciplines do just with qualitative. Any more questions, comments? You can also write in the chat. Let's see. We have a comment. Thank you, Fade, in law. It's for you to share with your supervisors. I hope you do this with the supervisors. You can do your own first version, then download the Word and share with supervisors. I use Word because as academics, we are used to track changes and comments, even with thesis. But regarding law, I must also say that law tends to be subjectivism. Okay, it tends to be interpreting the doctrine, existing doctrine. Maybe you have jurisprudence from the courts, and it's about being critical. But there is one caution I would say about law, which adds to what Olivia was commenting. I told you not to use idea puzzle with literature review only, or at least I find it just 5 of the 21 questions. In the case of law, I see many essays, and I would not say that idea puzzle is a tool for a great essay, right? So if you are doing an essay, a critical essay in law, you might have better tools than idea puzzle for that. Idea puzzle, as I say, is for empirical research. Is when you have to integrate theory, method, and data. Okay, more traditional scientific method. Thank you. So I hope you work with your supervisor. Surprise your supervisor with his Christmas gift. Just send it the first draft in Word, and I'm sure they will be happy to. At the end, what do we like in science? Questions. We have 21 here, right? Any more questions? If not, I wish you a wonderful holiday season. Happy Christmas, Happy New Year. And you have my contact there. Ask me anything. Click help and you find my email at the end. And I wouldn't give you this much tips if I wouldn't have received in the last 17 years so much from you. So please send me emails and make any question for me to learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.